Hello. So today's class we will be speaking about intersectionality. Intersectionality has become something of a buzzword in today's social sciences and in policy, even in corporate setups. But intersectionality has its roots in Black feminist thought, and it largely speaks to the idea that intersecting categories of identity such as race, class, caste, sexuality, national origin and others may have effects which are combined in a way that is different from just a simple adding one to the other, right? It's not a single axis kind of an analysis that they are seeking. Intersectionality wants to look at things together in the way they manifest together, and I think by the end of this class you would understand this better. Intersectionality comes of age during the late 20th century when ideas related to decolonization, related to civil rights movements in multiracial democracies, women rights movements, there is the end of Cold War, the end of apartheid in South Africa, all of that. So there is a sense of euphoria, there is a sense that somehow we are moving towards a more progressive, a more egalitarian society, that the arc of history is long, but it tends towards social justice. As we have moved on, we see new forms of colonialism, we see race appearing in different ways, we see caste-based discrimination having transformed into newer forms. So that still remains, but at the time that intersectionality is coming of age, there is a certain hopefulness, there's a certain sense that we could, through social theory and through understanding and analyzing the social world, we can move towards a more socially just world. So let's look at what the idea is. So while the term intersectionality was coined by Kimberlé Crenshaw, and we'll speak about that in a couple of minutes, but it's not as an idea, this was something that several other scholars before had also written about. They might have called it differently. So I'll start with the work of the Combahee River Collective and the statement that they wrote. The Combahee River Collective was a group of young Black lesbian feminist women that came together in Boston because they were feeling marginalized by both the African American civil rights movement, which was male dominated, and the white feminist movement. So they couldn't find their place in any one of these two movements, even as they were connected to both of them. The title Combahee River comes in order to commemorate Harriet Tubman's raid on the Combahee River that freed 750 slave women, and this was the only women-led military campaign, maybe even so far in the world. The only military campaign planned and led by a woman. The Combahee River Collective pays a ode to the Harriet Tubman, and I'll read out a little bit from the statement for you to get a sense of what is it that they are asking for in the statement. And in that statement, what is also critical for our lecture today is that they coined the term identity politics, something that we now almost speak of in an offhand manner, but it comes from the political struggle of the Combahee River Collective. It's the way it's used now, it often tends to become more superficial and doesn't seem to have the political urgency that it had at the time that it was coined. So they write, this focusing upon our own oppression is embodied in the concept of identity politics. We believe that the most profound and potentially most radical politics comes directly out of our own identity, as opposed to working to end somebody else's oppression. The most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see as our particular task the development of integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking, right? You see the seeds of the idea in their statement. In the practice of our politics, we do not believe that the end always justifies the means. So they're also talking about their method. many reactionary and destructive acts have been done in the name of achieving correct political goals. As feminists, we do not want to mess over people in the name of politics. So they're taking a stand here. We believe in the collective process and a non-hierarchical distribution of power. Very feminist methods in the way they are articulating the statement and in the way their theory or their statement translates into social action. And a non-hierarchical distribution of power within our own group and in our vision of revolutionary society. We are committed to a continual examination of our politics as they develop through criticism and self-criticism as an essential aspect of our practice. So you can see one, the idea of, let's say, identity politics, of the interlocking systems of oppression, but also how to work towards them in a non-hierarchical collective process that is at the same time self-reflexive, so open to change. I mean, if they see that something is not going in the direction that it should go in, and if the method is not in the right spirit, then they're open to changing that process through self-reflection and through constant self-criticism. Let's see some of the other scholars who have touched upon the idea which eventually comes to be termed as intersectionality. So Bell Hooks in Entire Woman, Black Woman and Feminism writes, sexist and racist oppression have always worked together to produce a specific social status for black women. So you cannot look at or privilege one form of identity over the other for embodied beings who embody both blackness and femaleness. And this can carry on to several other categories also. Chandra Mohanty in Under Western Eyes, where she is challenging white feminism, writes, women are constituted as subjects through complex and overlapping political, economic and cultural processes. So here she is looking at overlapping or intersectionality, not so much on identity terms, but in terms of how political, economic and cultural processes intersect in order to create a particular experience. Then Audre Lorde, there is no hierarchy of oppressions, writes, as a black, lesbian, feminist, socialist, poet, mother of two, including one boy, and a member of an interracial couple, I usually find myself part of some group in which the majority defines me as deviant, difficult, inferior, or just plain wrong. From my membership in all of these groups, I have learned that oppression and the intolerance of difference come in all shapes and sexes and colors and sexualities, and that among those of us who share the goals of liberation and a workable future for our children, there can be no hierarchies of oppression. It's not that someone is more oppressed because of their race than because of their gender, or someone is more oppressed because they're a member of a third world country rather than because they are a woman. So these are all intersecting in ways that you cannot prioritize one over the other. They create effects because of that intersection. I have learned that sexism and heterosexism both arise from the same source as racism. I cannot afford the luxury of fighting one form of oppression only. They have to be dealt with together. In order to be dealt with together, they have to be understood as together. Alright, so now we come to Kimberly Crenshaw, a legal scholar, legal theorist and a feminist who actually coined the term intersectionality, and that is the one that we are talking about today. Now, Kimberly Crenshaw comes to intersectionality through actual experience, through actual practice. When she read about the case of Emma DeGraffenreid, a black woman and a mother, and she had applied for a job to an automobile manufacturing factory and was refused, and she felt that the refusal was because of her race and gender, that because she was a black woman, and she filed a case in the courts, and the case was dismissed, saying that that particular company hired black men and that particular company hired women, so there was neither gender discrimination nor race discrimination. When Kimberly Crenshaw analyzes this case, she realizes that while there are men in that particular company, pretty much all of them are in working class jobs such as mechanics or as jobs that traditionally require the so-called masculine strength. When women are hired by that company, they are mostly hired in the so-called feminine roles such as those of office secretary. In none of these roles, black women were hired or hireable. But the courts did not have the language or did not have the framework in order to articulate a system of oppression that is coming in because of an intersecting racial and gendered identity. So in order to provide that framework, Kimberlé Crenshaw coins the term intersectionality, and she does it through two of her papers. One is called Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, published in 1989, and the other one, Mapping the Margins, 1991. So intersectionality in that sense is not about a particular identity or about just intersecting of identities. It's about how certain forms of identity, especially overlapping identities, become invisible within existing frameworks such that it leaves those people more vulnerable and outside the frame of intelligibility. And therefore, if you cannot analyze something, if you cannot articulate it, if you cannot frame it, then how do you work towards resolving it or providing the social justice that they have asked for? Let's read a bit from Kimberlé Crenshaw's essay, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Gender. She writes, I argue that black women are sometimes excluded from feminist theory and anti-racist policy discourse because both are predicated on a discrete set of experiences. So here she is not just challenging the justice system, she is also saying that feminist theory has so far not being able to articulate the experiences of black women. Discrete set of experiences that often does not accurately reflect the intersection of race and gender. These problems of exclusion cannot be solved simply by including black women within an already established analytical structure, because the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism. Any analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which black women are subordinated. So she really wants to emphasize that to look at race and gender together does not mean that you're simply just adding it up. The whole here is more than the sum of its parts. She further writes, consider an analogy to traffic in an intersection, coming and going in all four directions. Discrimination, like traffic through an intersection, may flow in one direction and it may flow in another. If an accident happens in an intersection, it can be caused by cars traveling from any number of directions and sometimes from all of them. Similarly, if a black woman is harmed because she is in the intersection, her injury could result from sex discrimination or from race discrimination. So she is here drawing an analogy of an intersection, is that there is a car coming in from here and there is a car coming in from here, and if the accident happens at the intersection, then how do you figure out? You can't figure out, because there are all these multiplying and intersecting categories or forms of identity, that it is the aspect that they are overlapping which becomes significant, and not just that one axis that one might talk about. And one can be privileged or underprivileged because of whole lot of different categories that one belongs to and how they are embodied in one's own being. So we now come to the work of Patricia Hills Collins, who is a sociologist in fact, and has taken intersectionality as something that is central to the work that she does. Well, central to the work that she does is the core question, and she herself articulates as, what will it take for black people to be free? That she says is the core question that guides her scholarship and her mission in life. And of course, here when she says black people, she's also talking about all people, because according to feminist theory, you can't have one kind of people not free for any kind of people to be free. You need everyone to be free, and you need the kind of structures that enable that freedom for everyone. She also talks about her work in sociology and her work on intersectionality, which she calls critical social theory. And she says intersectionality should not become, in fact, the buzzword that it has, and should retain its critical edge and should be critical social theory. But for that, it can't be just a vocabulary term. It has to move towards social action. It has to have a transformative effect in the lives of people. And this, she says, for her is an aspirational project, a project that goes beyond just oneself, one's identity, in order to make change in the social world. So she's analyzed the different ways in which intersectionality has been used. She speaks about it in terms of how it's been used as a metaphor, as a heuristic, or as a paradigm once it becomes part of the sociological canon also. What is central to intersectionality is also the fact that it is committed to decolonizing knowledges. So Patricia Hills Collins has been quite central to questioning where does knowledge come from, who creates knowledge, whose knowledge is valued, whose knowledge is considered knowledge, and what that knowledge does to how we can act as social actors. So she really her project has been to bring forth different forms of knowledge, those from the marginalized into the mainstream. She also argues that for sociology to be critical to, or for feminist theory to be a critical social theory, for intersectionality to be a critical social theory, it must emerge from social struggle. It must be part of social action. It can't be, you can't be just sitting on a chair and writing intersectionality and assuming that it would change the world, right? You go figure it out, I've written the paper. It doesn't stop at discussion, it doesn't stop at description, it doesn't stop at analysis, it has to lead to social action. That's when it's a critical social theory. And that is where she wants to push intersectionality towards. She says it has the potential, but it's not quite there yet. It has to have a connection with resistant knowledge projects. It has to have a connection with people whose voices are otherwise not heard, who are not the majority, who are not the powerful, who are not the ones who otherwise get to create the public discourse. It has to be founded on relationality in terms of addition, bringing in more voices, articulation, and co-formation. So the collective project that the Combahee River Collective was talking about is also what Patricia Hills Collins is articulating in her work. Towards the end, I want to read out 4 aspects of intersectionality, kind of like a summary. Intersectionality investigates how race, class, gender, sexuality, age, ability, religion, nation, several categories, constitute intersecting systems of power that mutually construct one another. Intersectionality examines how the social inequalities within intersecting power relations are organized, endure, change, and are resisted. Intersectionality is an ongoing project of critical praxis that offers tools for solving problems. It is not just a theory that is to be written down, to be circulated in books. It has to bring about social change, help resolve social problems. Intersectionality reflects and informs broader struggles for social justice. The belief that we are responsible for building more socially just societies. So we'll end the lecture here today. Thank you and see you in the next class.